you, Harry. So this is an opportunity now to ask a few questions. We have some time here to invite questions from the audience. And I'd like to take one of the questions that came in, and Harry or Mark, I'm happy to either of you to take this one, but Mark, Harry, I'll give it to you first. Is one question came in, says, so if we were to break apart the current system, the corrupt system of the gambling industry funding treatment in America, where could potential funding come from to help people who are addicted from gambling? So Harry, I don't know if you have any thoughts on where we could go as a solution if we break apart this corrupt system.
I have a few thoughts on that, Les, and there actually is, first of all, we need to look to our friends in the United Kingdom where this is happening right now. And they are reviewing on a national level their gambling laws. We need to look, and there are tremendous independent advocates in the United Kingdom. I think Liz and Charles Ritchie from Gambling with Lives are on the call. There are wonderful people in the United Kingdom from an independent standpoint who've been looking at this. But focusing here in America, there's actually a relatively straightforward roadmap. The first is that we eliminate the connection between the gambling industry giving money to the states and the states giving money to the local affiliates of the National Council on Problem Gambling. And we look at this as a national issue because public health is a national issue. This needs to be attacked in a national way. So the first step is that we have a national and state levy on the gambling industry that goes directly to independent funding through NIH or CDC. More importantly, from a treatment perspective, when President Obama passed the Affordable Health Care Act in 2010, one of the provisions of the Affordable Health Care Act was to mandate that every health insurance policy in America provide both inpatient and outpatient treatment coverage for addiction. Now, if you are struggling with drug addiction, alcohol addiction, there is funding under every health insurance policy in America to cover that pursuant to the Affordable Health Care Act. The Affordable Health Care Act was passed in 2010. In 2013, the American Psychiatric Association, followed by the American Medical Association, followed by the World Health Organization, all recognized that gambling is an addictive product and that gambling addiction is an addiction on the same level as drugs, alcohol, tobacco, opioids, cocaine. Well, if the Affordable Health Care Act mandates coverage for every health insurance policy in America for addiction treatment, inpatient and outpatient, gambling needs to be included. And this should be an issue where the gambling companies, the NFL, the media titans, and independent advocates can all join together. Congress needs to recognize gambling as a full-fledged addiction, needs to protect the men and women in the military, both in uniform and out of uniform, and the general public. Once gambling is recognized as an addiction, health insurance coverage will follow. The money that states are currently using in a failed system, part of responsible gaming, can be allocated to independent research on the federal level.
Okay, thank you. Another question, and Mark or Harry, welcome to this, but and Harry, I don't know if this is something you're versed in enough, but was a question that came in, can we speak to the gambling industry's presence on Capitol Hill and how it influences lawmakers at the state and federal level? I mean, I have some strong views on this, but I'd like to defer to our panelists if they want to weigh in on this.
Mark, do you want to take that first?
I think Les, you're probably the most well-versed on this. Please.
Yeah, that would have been my answer as well.
Okay, sure.
I just throw that one back.
I just want it was without a doubt that the commercialized gambling industry is one of the top 2 or 3 most powerful special interests in the United States today. And one is because the enormous amount of money they have behind them. But the second aspect that makes them so powerful is, and we've kind of understated this fact in today's webinar a little bit, is the role of the state. Like, this is a government program. Like, these guys are operating in partnership with state governments. And so there's not a state attorney general in the United States that has ever brought consumer protection litigation against a commercialized gambling interest, because state government's a partner. This whole business is illegal unless you partner with the state. So when the question is, the gambling industry is arguably one of the most powerful interests in the country today. We just saw it in December when they rammed through the special interest legislation to legalize a off-reservation casino in North Carolina, which is one of the most appalling things I've seen happen in my 30 years of political life. So without a doubt, these guys are huge players, and it's because the state is a partner to it. So if your state government stops using this as a budget gimmick and gets into the business of protecting citizens from these predatory practices, the power and influence of gambling interests would start to wane somewhat. But they'd be a big step in the right direction.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense, Les. I mean, it's almost in many cases like the industry is paying the state protection money, but really their duty is to protect the people and the health of our people more than to protect these companies, which is what they're doing. I had talked about, this reminds me of the 1950s with tobacco. And here we are, 70 years later with tobacco, and still experiencing all of the public health consequences of smoking over the past generations. It can't take that long for us to take action in regards to the gambling industry here. We learned, well, first of all, the gambling industry learned an awful lot from big tobacco, but we did as well. And I think we can respond through our government, through foundations that can I think need to step up and sponsor research and help with the advocacy around this. And we can do this in much less time, and we really have to, because the growth of gambling is unlike what we saw with smoking in the 1950s. So the urgency is here, and I think we do have some insights that we can apply to really come up with common sense policies. I hate to put states in the position where they're profiting along with the industry. And that's probably the greatest challenge to start to break that bond.
And if I may build on that for just a moment, I think that there are two approaches that need to take place concurrently. On the state level, I have spoken to enough groups and met with enough state legislators that I am of the belief there are a not insignificant number of elected officials who are unaware of exactly how this product is being delivered. Last month in the state of Colorado, for example, $13 million was wagered on Russian table tennis in the middle of the night online. I would like to believe that there are men and women elected officials at the state level who are completely unaware that DraftKings is promoting at 10 a.m. on television I hate to use the word bonus, but a bonus system that is literally designed to get people to wager more than they can afford. I would like to think that as independent advocates come together and make elected officials aware, there's opportunity on the state level. I also am wise enough to recognize that the true public health reform is going to require a federal approach. Professor John Kent from the University of Illinois School of Law has recently published an amazing law review edition that addresses this very issue. And when the United States Supreme Court made its decision in Murphy, while it did strike down PASPA and clear the way for this explosive growth of sports betting, that can also serve as an invitation for Congress to act on the public health aspects of this. So I'd like to think, Les, that as people like yourself and many other independent advocates on this webinar right now begin to get more involved with us at Stop Predatory Gambling at the Public Health Advocacy Institute, that there will be momentum to take this awareness, bring it to the attention of Congress, and begin to get some intervention on the federal level, because that's really where I believe public health policy reform needs to take place.
Sure. And so, Harry, this may be a little more, have you expand a little bit more on what you said, but this next question comes in at, what are the prospects for the Federal Trade Commission to regulate these false claims and gambling advertising? What are the prospects that they might weigh in, knowing with the context that, for the essentially commercialized gambling, when it's partnered by the state, has essentially been exempt from truth in advertising regulation. So how would you approach, organizations like the Federal Trade Commission to get them to start really hammering these false claims of advertising like we do for every other business in the United States?
The end of your question is the beginning of the answer. I am no longer an attorney. I lost the privilege to be an attorney as part of the horrible things that I did in the grip of a pathological gambling addiction. So I am not answering this question with any legal expertise. I'm answering it from a position of a counseling student, a future counselor as of May, and a public policy and public health advocacy expert. I firmly believe that the public is unaware of how the promotions work. I believe this begins with education. When people are educated that risk-free bets are the very definition of gambling harm, whether it's the FTC, the FCC, the Department of Justice, Congress itself, there are multiple avenues in to address a public health problem. Because the meaning of the Murphy case was not open season on the American public with a dangerous product. So rather than starting with, this is what the FTC or the FCC should do, I think it begins with what the people who joined us today are willing to do, which is learn and open up a discussion. Because I don't believe we live in a country where it is appropriate for the government to look the other way as the National Football League partners with a gambling company and says on a Saturday morning on television, hey, we'll give you $2,000. By the way, you're going to have to wager between $60,000 to $600,000 to get it. That's not how our system is designed to work. So there are multiple pathways in, but they begin by us educating each other and knocking on doors.
You mentioned, Harry, that this is 10 a.m. on a Saturday. But I think the other purpose of that advertising is to target the audience that used to watch cartoons on Saturday mornings. This would be young people, and the risk-free stuff may not and bonuses may not mean that much to them, but it certainly creates a very positive and image of what gambling is, and sort of a reassurance that, hey, they got you covered. Nothing bad can happen, and that is also directed at very young brains watching those shows.
Mark, you're entirely correct, and I think it's even worse when you think about where I believe the words risk-free are designed to go. As many people on this call know, I made my last bet on April 27, 2014. I gambled starting at the age of 14. I gambled for 36 years. Gambling addiction took me within 30 seconds of ending my own life. So I know a little bit about what it feels like to be struggling with gambling. Those words, risk-free bet, are designed for the person who is chasing action. They're not designed for the everyday player. They're designed for the person who needs to remain in action. The gambling industry knows it. The gambling establishment knows it. Independent advocates who understand gambling know it. There's no question about that. To your broader point, the issue of targeting an audience. I am hoping that Les will invite us back to do more seminars moving forward because there's so much more material to discuss. 3 weeks ago, Martin Luther King holiday, that Monday, which I believe was the 15th or the 16th of January. I was home working on this presentation. I work better with background noise. I turn the TV on. The NBA does great matinee basketball on Martin Luther King Day. The Philadelphia 76ers were playing the Washington Wizards on NBC Sports Philadelphia, owned by Comcast, partner of PointsBet. I lost count while watching that basketball game at 2:30 in the afternoon, at 18, the number of gambling advertisements during matinee basketball that is designed for children who are home from school that day. That's why the NBA is on at that time. One of two things is true. Either state elected officials are blissfully ignorant about this and they're just turning the other cheek because of the money that's coming in, or they're not yet aware. It's too soon to say, but on a state level, we have to be addressing these things because the facts speak for themselves.
Good. So Harry, you touch on a point that one of the questions from the audience came up, and that is, we haven't really focused too much of the spotlight on them today, and that is the role of these big national media companies. So when you bring up the idea, we need to have a discussion about this, put a spotlight on it. You have many of the national media companies who, have great news organizations who report things both at the national level, and you have state capital news agencies who cover state capital news. Like many of these media companies are making money from the gambling industry. They're essentially vested partners in this. So how can that discussion take place? How do we challenge some of these media companies to also break apart, who are becoming really reliant on this profit center? How do you have the discussion when media folks are kind of part of this corruption right now that's happening, this incredible blitz of advertising? We're profiting from predatory gambling.
The reality is that the largest media titans in the world have absolutely no financial incentive to have this discussion. None. I mentioned Comcast. Comcast owns a big piece of PointsBet. There's FoxBet, which is controlled by Fox Broadcasting Network. We can go on and on and on in listing these things.
Associated Press, gets into it, but it's endless.
ESPN, which is owned by Disney. So let's focus. And I showed a slide, not because I think that the evening news on 6 ABC in Philadelphia is all that interesting, but the 6 ABC in Philadelphia is owned by the Disney company, the same company that owns ESPN. That company sold the sportscast of the evening news to DraftKings to put up a QR code. The relationships are so intertwined. Disney announced late last year that they're willing to auction off the ESPN brand to a gambling company for marketing purposes, and the bids they project are going to begin at $3 billion. I am not naive enough to believe, no matter how persuasive we might be, that merely presenting these facts is enough. This is where intervention on a federal level will be mandatory. And that's, for me, that's why I chose to show the World Series. I chose to show the World Series because is there anything more linked with the history of American sports than baseball in the World Series? And that was the middle of the 5th inning of a crucial game. So the idea that they're going to say, wait a minute, this is bad, the money that is pouring in is impossible to comprehend. But until this webinar, until you, Les, at Stop Predatory Gambling said to us, will you begin to present these facts? No one in this country is talking about this.
So, Harry, one question that came in that it's important, and we should really draw a spotlight on this, because this is really what younger people are getting their information is. We focused a lot on this webinar on the television aspect of the marketing and promotions. But can you spend just a minute talking about the social media marketing that's happening to people? Because that's really, we've seen in other countries like the United Kingdom, the role that social media marketing has in getting young people hooked on gambling. So I'm wondering can you spend a little bit about what's happening on that front?
I'll be happy to. But I also want to talk less tied to the social media are the digital platforms themselves. My recovery, fortunately, one day at a time is strong. I made my last bet nearly 8 years ago. I can't begin to imagine the struggle. Actually, I can because I work with people every day. The general public can't begin to imagine the struggle that men and women are facing trying to break free from a gambling problem with the overwhelming access to action that these digital platforms present. I showed you a couple slides. If you sit there on your computer and you literally watch every play, I was watching Australian Open tennis, every serve in a tennis match, every swing of a golf club is another opportunity to bet. If you don't struggle with a gambling problem, it's not an issue. But for men and women, young and old, who struggle with a gambling problem, having the immediate access to action on these platforms, where they are offering you parlay bonuses and boosts. Again, much of this is for our next seminar and beyond, but recognize that it's not just the advertising on social media. It's once drawn into the platform. I showed our audience DraftKings commercial, 7 hands of blackjack at once. The draw to action is a reach out to people who are struggling. That's the profit center. And in regard to social media, you can't go on social media without hitting gambling ad after gambling ad after gambling ad. It's a more complicated area to regulate because it's the internet. It's not broadcast media in America. But all of this goes back to my AAC model. How are we going to deal with access to action and chase? Because all of the marketing and promotions and delivery of the product is designed to maximize for the gambling establishment those 3 items. Again, that's why we looked at the NFL's model. It's all built around AAC.
Oh, that's the insidiousness of the social media advertising, is that it's on the device you're going to use for the betting platforms, the gambling platforms. You've got it right there. So there's that access and opportunity is unprecedented, I think, with any other product in terms of how the social media can influence behavior.
And that's why, Les, in future seminars, we need to explore the fallacy of responsible gaming, which ultimately says to the end user, it's your responsibility to make the correct decision. It's sort of like a magician who waves a handkerchief in the air while he's performing a trick over here. Pay no attention to what we're really doing. Look at this wonderful terminology we use as a sword and a shield. Responsible gaming. Well, so what? If you're not for responsible gaming, what are you for? Irresponsible gaming? The title resonates. We need to look at what it really means, because it is the antithesis of what Mark and his esteemed colleague and partner, Professor Richard Daynard, do for a living, which is public health. Public health is the opposite of responsible gaming. Public health is we have to address how this product is delivered. We have to address the means of access and the action that the gambling establishment is delivering. That's where public health starts.
So we just have time for a couple more questions before we finish up, Harry and Mark. But one question that came in is, why do you think the U.S. Surgeon General has not weighed in on the issue of commercialized gambling, over the years? They've weighed in on tobacco, they've weighed in on obesity, they've weighed in on, drunken driving. Why not commercialize gambling, and what will it take, you think, to get the U.S. Surgeon General to use the clout of that office to really put this on the map as a public health issue?
I mean, there's a cynical view that there is pressure on the office not to get involved. I think it's inevitable. I can't tell you what year it's going to come out, but I would imagine within the next 3 years. I would hope there's enough literature now, I think, to support the type of report that the Surgeon General's office would issue. I think it would be a great service in terms of raising the awareness generally that this is not risk-free activity and a risk-free product by any means.
Les, Mark is right. There's also, if we choose to go the non-cynical route, which I choose to do for this webinar. A little bit of history is important. You know, gambling wasn't even recognized as a problem until 1980, when it was deemed an impulse control disorder. The medical community caught up in 2013 and recognized it as an addictive product, as we discussed today. 2018 was the game changer when the Murphy case was decided. So from a non-cynical perspective, I would suggest that we are right now at the time for the Surgeon General, the National Institute of Health to get involved. I will also tell you that there have been efforts to fund studies, Mark mentioned at the beginning, about this being a public harm issue. 4 other countries have looked at public harm and commercialized gambling and have found with independent research that approximately 16% of the general public is harmed on an annual basis by commercialized gambling. We've never had an independent study from a public health, public harm perspective in America. There have been proposals, and the gambling establishment has shot them down. If the numbers are consistent in America, and one would suggest they'll be larger because of the growth of online betting in America and media attention. But if they're even just 16%, we're talking upwards of 55 million people a year in America being harmed. When that becomes the public health model, the Surgeon General, the National Institute of Health, the CDC will be required to get involved. So the non-cynic in me says public health, public health, public health. And that's how we get there.
Thank you. So what I'd like to do before we wind down is maybe Mark and Harry, if you have any, one final thought you want to share with our webinar guests today, and then I'll close it out.
Well, I'll just quickly say, I think this was sort of my message throughout is that, time is of the essence here. We are going to have latent harms. We don't want to wait for huge percentages of the population to be suffering these ill effects before we take action, because again, these harms are latent. So prevention now and as soon as possible is important. We can't wait 50 years like we did with cigarettes. We need to start to turn this around within 5.
Thank you. Harry?
I want to, first of all, thank everyone for their interest and attending. I want to thank Mark for co-presenting with me. And my closing message would be, get involved. Public health matters. The things we've looked at today are, as I said earlier, the tip of the iceberg. And regardless of what side you think you come down on, public health isn't about sides. Gambling is an addictive product. What has happened in America since May of 2018 is a risk of public harm, and the harm is amongst us already, and it's going to get worse. It need not be that way, but the way things currently are unsustainable, they are dangerous, and it's time to begin to work together to do something about it. I hope that this webinar delivered that message, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to present to everyone.
Thank you. So for you viewers who participated today, this webinar is going to be in a series of webinars that we're going to do on commercialized gambling operators to reveal the truth about what's happening here. And before we sign off, I want to recognize the work of 3 of my colleagues, of our colleagues in this, Kate Rossi, our development director, Eric Stamps, our digital communications director, and Debbie Blank, our financial manager, all of whom played a role in helping pull this event off. And then lastly, if you support our mission at Stop Predatory Gambling, I urge you to, our mission is to reveal the truth behind predatory gambling operators to prevent more victims. If you support the work we do, please visit our website, join our organization, get involved, and you can follow us on social media as well at our locations. And also want to recognize again the partnership we have with Public Health Advocacy Institute in putting this event together today. Thank you, everyone, and we wish you a great afternoon.